Will you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Every morning when I wake up and check my email, my inbox is overflowing with urgent needs for my support. There's a march about climate change on Wednesday, a rally for immigrant justice on Saturday, an interfaith panel on Islamophobia, a forum on transgender rights, and a dozen other groups who desperately need my time, attention, and money. These days, many of us live in a perfect storm of issue overload. So many things falling apart. So many needs arising. And so many ways for people to get our attention. Email, Facebook, Instagram, listservs, all of them clamoring for us to help fix what is wrong. And there is a lot wrong. Those of us who find ourselves on those email lists are there because we care. Because we believe in giving back and paying it forward and standing up for what we say we support. We are advocates for justice and equality and compassion, and we don't want to change that. But we also tend to be the kind of people who can't say no. We give, we show up, we organize, and this can leave us ripe for burnout. Because there is a breaking point. Overwhelmed with too many crises to respond to, we can just start checking out. We stretch ourselves too thin. We can start to get a little cranky and even a little resentful. And worst of all, sometimes we become numb. Folks in what's known as caring professions seem the most susceptible. When my clergy pals and I get together, sometimes it feels like we're in a contest for who is the most exhausted. And we offer each other good advice, and we send each other articles about drawing boundaries and self-care, but mostly we just roll our eyes. Who has time for a spa day when the world is falling apart? Mental health professionals call it compassion fatigue, and it is real. And it's not just for pastors. I know I am looking out at a room full of people who care too. And I'm guessing your inboxes are probably just as full as mine, and you feel called and pulled in a dozen different directions, and you probably struggle with saying no. And every once in a while, you just want to tune it all out and cuddle up with 3 seasons of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and a box of Girl Scout Thin Mints. Totally tip my hand here, people. Don't deny it, and don't apologize for it either. You do what you have to refill your tank. Which makes me wonder, what would Jesus binge watch? I know we think of Jesus as having a bottomless well of compassion for anyone who needed him. And we picture him with endless patience, always accessible, always ready to save the day by turning water into wine or calming the storm, curing the sick, or feeding 5,000 on the fly. He puts us all to shame. He makes our exhaustion over having to answer just one more email feel pathetic and a little self-indulgent. But those superhero Jesus gospel stories are only one part of the picture. Because Jesus also drew the line when he needed to. He went up to the mountain to be alone. He sailed across the sea to get away. And he made a point of hanging out with friends who wouldn't talk shop. When the line of lepers grew too long, when the swarming crowds got too close, when the constant demands got too much, Jesus took a break. If he could have, my guess is, he would have turned off his phone, grabbed a bag of Doritos, and binge-watched The Good Place on a Sunday afternoon. Because Jesus was not only the embodiment of the living God, he is also a human being, and human beings have limits. And it's not a cop-out from compassion to recognize that. It's the cure for its fatigue. The other thing that Jesus knew how to do was to delegate. He was not a lone ranger in ministry. In fact, the first thing he did after he felt God's call on his life was to get a team around him, to build a crew. because his world was also a perfect storm of issue overload. Poverty, hunger, and disease were everywhere. The political systems were crushing the people with taxation and debt, and the religious systems were burdening them with oppressive rules and exclusive practices. There was so much neglect and frustration and despair. The people needed to see and to feel and to know that God was among them, and Jesus knew he wasn't going to be able to handle it all himself. So he empowered his friends to help carry the load. He trained them and he set them out into the towns and villages to feed and to heal and to love in his name. He sent them out to be his hands and feet in the places that he could not reach. He sent them out to show everyone that God's presence is not restricted to the temple courts or the synagogues, but that God's love is not just for the ones who seem to have it all together. He used a group of ragtag, clueless, dysfunctional, extremely imperfect people to make it clear that God was able to work through anyone who was willing to step up. We see this really clearly in our gospel story this morning. Now this one comes right on the heels of what we heard last week, which was Jesus' proclamation of what we call the Beatitudes, what I like to think of as his manifesto on ministry, where Jesus stands on the side of a mountain and shocks the crowd with a new description of what blessing looks like in the world. Blessed are the poor and the sad and the gentle, he says. Blessed are the hungry and the advocates and the peacemakers. Blessed are the ones who take risks and get blowback for standing up for what is right. Mitt, I'm looking at you. Blessed are all the people who care enough to turn this world upside down, Jesus says. And then he takes it one step forward. And he moves from that sort of abstract, blessed are those, and he says to the people seated right in front of him, blessed are you. Blessed are you, he says, because you are essential. You are like salt, and you are like light. Salt, that most basic of elements that brings out flavor, that makes food last, and light, which reveals and illuminates and guides. This is who you are, Jesus says, and the world can't survive without you. Now, no doubt this was overwhelming to those stressed and burdened people on that hillside. How can we be what the world needs when we can barely hold it together ourselves? They probably wondered. But Jesus saw something different in them. He knew what they were capable of. Carrying God's image within himself, he could easily recognize it in them. And he knew that they needed to hear it. Because there are a couple things that can happen to us when we feel like we are carrying the weight of the world. One, we feel like we need to fix it all ourselves. And two, knowing we can't, we decide we can't do anything. And we become blind to our abilities, and we become numb to our gifts. We get paralyzed. So Jesus shakes them out of it. Yes, he says the world is a troubled place and there is so much to do, but you don't need to do it all by yourself. You've got backup. And together we can make God's dream real right here, right now. Just show the world your gifts. Shine your particular light. Spice it up with your particular flavor, and that will be enough. Everybody's contribution will be different. You do you. Each one of you, as boldly as you can, and let God take care of the rest. You do you. Never really liked that phrase. It always sounded a little glib, a little indulgent, like a free pass to do whatever we want. But it's kind of growing on me in this context, because that phrase reminds us that our authentic selves do matter, that our unique gifts and passions matter, and that there's a price to pay when we deny them or hide them, put them under a bushel, out of fear or insecurity. When we harness them to help meet the great needs of the world, we are then really living into our true God-called purpose, fully alive people in partnership with God. And that is what the world needs right now. Not folks who say yes to everything and then burn out, but folks who choose to follow their passions and focus on what they can do right in front of them. That one thing that caught your eye, that caught your heart, that needs doing. The one thing that you know you are good at. The one thing that can even make a small difference. Are the melting ice caps keeping you up at night? Drive less, walk more. Contribute to 350.org. Bring your tote bags to the grocery store. Vote in the next election. Outraged by cruel immigration policies? Volunteer for the Montclair Sanctuary Alliance. Contribute to First Friends. Become trained to accompany someone to a deportation hearing. Vote in the next election. Concerned about kids in our community that go to school hungry? Donate to local food banks. Volunteer at soup kitchens. Offer to pay off the lunch debt of kids in our middle school. Vote in the next election. Worried about the assault on our democracy? Get involved in civic groups. Attend town halls. Register folks to vote. Drive people to the polls. And of course, vote in the next election. You get what I mean. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to do it alone. Find your lane and be okay staying in it because someone else has the other lane. They've got it covered. Find your lane and drive it with all the salt and light you've got. Resist cynicism and believe that change is possible. Ditch despair and choose hope. Become, as Steve Almond wrote in a recent article, fanatical optimists, putting our faith in our collective power to rewrite the story. Focus your energies on what you can do each day, and go to bed knowing each night, knowing you've done what you can, and others are stepping in where you can't. Believe in the power of small acts done with great love. Be salty. Be bright. You be you and let the world see the kind of change we can do together. God already knows we have what it takes. Now let's show the world. May it be so. Amen.